Good afternoon, everyone, including members of the public who are watching the live webcast. My name is Marilee Selesky, and I am the chair of the HRM Design Review Committee. Welcome to this virtual committee meeting being held on September 8th, 2022. I will call the meeting to order at 4:35 p.m. And I will start the meeting off by reading the following land acknowledgement. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. As is standard for virtual meetings, we will start the meeting with an AV check. We have 3 new members who are joining us for their first official meeting today, so welcome and thank you. I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves, their role on the committee line of work, and how long they have been a part of the committee for. We'll start with Charlotte Fouquet.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I wasn't sure. So my name is Charlotte Fouquet. I am a landscape architect in Halifax. I come from France, so variety of backgrounds, and I've been on the committee since last year, I believe. So just 1 year.
Great, thank you. Christina Verissimo. Do we have Christina? Does not look like it. Okay, we'll circle back around if she joins us. Nathan Gee.
Hi, I'm Nathan Gee. I'm a structural engineer. I'm also vice chair on this committee, and I've been a part of this committee for about 1.5 years.
Thanks, Nathan. Rob LeBlanc.
Hi guys, Rob LeBlanc. I'm a planner and landscape architect. Been on the committee here for 1.5 years, and prior to this version of the committee, 3 years prior, with a 2-year break. So.
Great, thanks, Rob. Next up is Sandrine Mounier.
Chair, my apologies. Yeah, we received regrets from Sandrine this afternoon.
Okay, all right. Next is Doug Raphael.
Hi, Doug Raphael. I've been on the committee since the beginning of the year. I'm a real estate investor and developer in Halifax and Montreal. It's the first meeting for me.
Welcome, thank you. Next up is Jonathan Gauguin Manning. Please tell me how to say it.
It's a good one that catches them. It's French and English, so it's Jonathan Gauguin Manning. I'm an architect in Halifax, and I've been on the committee for about half a year.
Great, thank you. Stanley North.
Hey there, I am Stanley North. I am a general contractor, but on the committee, I represent a community member at large, and this will actually be my first official meeting.
Welcome. And we have regrets from Erica Armstrong. Just to wrap up, you know my name, and my role on the committee. Outside of this role, I am a project manager with Colliers Project Leaders. I also am a registered architect, and I have been with the committee. This is my 2nd term that I'm going into. So, all right. Well, welcome everyone. It has been a while since our last meeting. The last set of minutes that were issued were from January 13th of this year. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 13th, 2022?
Oh, motion.
So mover is Doug, and seconder?
Rob.
Rob?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so we have a mover with Doug and seconder with Rob. Are there any errors or omissions noted in the minutes from that meeting? Seeing none. Okay, thank you. Now I'll call for the question. All of those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Any contrary minded, say nay for the approval of the minutes.
Aye.
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 Okay. So the motion is carried. Thank you. Moving on to our next order, approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Are there any additions or modifications to the agenda that should be noted at this time? Annie or Andrea?
My apologies, Chair. The clerk's office didn't receive any requests for additions or deletions for today's meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. For the members present today, are there any changes that you would like to make to the agenda? No? Okay, so then can I get a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
I'll move.
Charlotte, thank
I'll
you.
second.
1 second.
Second was Stanley. Okay, thank you very much. So I'll now call for the question to approve the agenda as circulated. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any contrary minded, please say nay.
Aye.
I
Aye.
Great. And the motion is passed. Thank you. Next up, business arising out of the minutes. There was none outstanding, so we'll move into call for declaration of conflict of interest. Do any of the committee members have a conflict that they would like to declare as a result of an agenda item on the meeting today? No? Okay, so there are no conflicts of interest to be declared today. Consideration of deferred business, we have none this month, so we can move directly into correspondence. Annie, has there been any correspondence received by the clerk's office that we should review?
Thank you, Chair. There was no correspondence received from the clerk's office.
Perfect. Are there any petitions?
Thank you, Chair. And there was no petitions received either.
Okay, thank you. And we have no external presentations. In terms of information items brought forward, there are none noted in the agenda. So we can move into the meat of the meeting directly into reports and discussion. Upcoming applications. Carl, can you please provide an overview of any upcoming applications that the DRC should be made aware of?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Carl Purvis, Planning Applications Program Manager. There is one application that we expect to be received to the committee quite shortly. It's the Waverly Inn, which is the existing sort of hotel on the west side of Barrington Street, not far away at all from this site that we're going to be discussing today, south of Morris. So it's a similar type of application wherein their application is to restore and refit the existing heritage building and put a relatively significant addition to the rear in order to offset the cost of the rehabilitation. So that one we expect, and Madam Chair and the clerk, we discussed the timing of that and sort of the sensitivity on that, but we're expecting that will be reaching your inboxes in the coming weeks.
Great. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the members for Carl regarding the upcoming application? No? Okay. So we are here today to talk about case 24388, substantive site plan approval for the property located at 5185-89 South Street and 1221 Barrington Street. We'll now move on to that item, and we'll start with a presentation from staff, and members of the committee will be able to ask questions for clarification of the presentation. The applicant will then provide a presentation, and members will have an opportunity to ask more questions to the applicant directly. And then following those questions, I will ask for a mover and a seconder of the motion, and members can discuss the motion on the floor. Carl, do you want to start us off with the staff presentation?
Certainly. Let's see here. Madam Chair or Clerk, I'm wondering, are you seeing the full screen version of the presentation at the moment or some other version?
I can see this. It's not the full presentation mode.
Are you seeing the one like sort of the version where if I had notes, there would be notes in it? No?
No.
To staff, the clerk's office can share the presentation on your behalf if that's easier.
I'm sorry about that. It very well may be. If that's the option, let's go with that.
No worries. Okay, just one moment here.
Carl, we could see your first slide. Just we could see your little the other slides on the left-hand side. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll go through as is, and if we need to revert, we can certainly do that. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Carl Purvis, Planning Application Program Manager. I've been working at HRM for about 9 years and coming to this meeting through that time. I'm speaking to this application on behalf of our planner who's been working on the file, Dean McDougall, who can't be here today. And this is a site plan approval for 5185 to 5189 South Street and 1221 Barrington Street. Next slide, please. So the applicant for this proposal is ZAP Consulting, and we do have Mr. Connor Wallace here, who's one of our very well-versed applicants who knows the bylaw up and down, and I'm sure can help assist the committee in any questions that they may have. This is the north east corner of Barrington and South Street, and they're looking to restore the existing heritage building. There's that the 4-story building known as the Elmwood on the bright yellow building on this site. They're going to pick that up, move it towards the corner of the site, and put in a 9-story, 9-floor addition to the existing building. Next slide, please. So this is the site on the left, a broader view, and then more specifically on the right-hand side, you can see Peace and Friendship Park, formerly known as Cornwallis Park, to the south of this site. An existing development that was previously approved by the Design Review Committee, known as the Soho, to the east. And then to the west, we have Barrington Street. Next slide, please. So as the vast majority of the downtown land use bylaw area is, this is zone DH1, downtown Halifax zone 1, but it also has the additional intricacy of being within the Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District. The site is fronting 2 pedestrian-oriented commercial streets, which require certain active uses and commercial uses at grade for both Barrington as well as South Streets. It also has various floor area ratios, street wall setbacks, street wall height requirements that I'll speak to later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So again, the site on the left-hand side, running north-south, Barrington Street, South Street, the primary frontage for the existing building. And you can see the yellow building there in the red square. And that would be, again, picked up and moved towards the bottom and to the left, or to the south and to the west, leaving room for an L-shaped building in the rear. Next slide, please. This is the property as it exists relatively recently today. The property could I think everyone would agree, could do with some care and some attention, and it's going to be receiving that should the committee approve this. I also draw your attention to the larger sort of blank faux brick wall that's on the Soho just behind this building, or in the background of this building. The proposal also includes the sort of the mid-century building that fronts Barrington Street, which is also highlighted in red on this page. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed development. Again, the building, the existing heritage resource being picked up and moved towards the corner, leaving room with the L-shape for the L-shaped building. So you can see the L just in the background, the top 2-3 floors of that building in the background, leaving room for a pedestrian access closer towards that existing Soho building. And then that mid-century building being replaced by the larger 9-story addition that's fronting on Barrington Street being the street on the left-hand side of this. Next slide, please. This is the site plan. So again, from top down, you can see where the proposed relocation of the Elmwood would be. There's portions of a street wall of 3 stories on South Street and 3 stories in addition on Barrington Street to reflect our street wall requirements, and then a smaller 1-story atrium. The purpose of the 1-story atrium is to follow our heritage guidelines, which suggest that the heritage building should be the prominent building on the site, with the additions and the newer aspects of the development being sort of pushed to the background. So that 1-story atrium allows these buildings to connect with each other while still creating a prominence of for the heritage building, which was something asked for by our heritage plans. Next slide, please. This is the elevation as you would see it on Barrington Street. So we can see again the Elmwood on the right-hand side, that 1-story atrium that I spoke to immediately beside that. So that would be the primary, one of the primary residential entrances to this building. And then moving further along, there would be some commercial uses and commercial accesses within those sort of storefront windows that you can see. And that would be further to the commercial, pedestrian-oriented commercial frontages that we require. Next slide, please. This is the building as it would be seen along South Street. So this would be seen from the park looking towards the north. This is the Elmwood in the foreground, the smaller 1-story atrium to the immediate right or to the east of that. And then again, coming back up to the required street wall height or near to it. I'll speak to that in a few slides. Further to the east and against the existing Soho building. This building is proposed as a 0 setback, so it would be flush against that building in the property line. Next slide, please. The committee is responsible largely for approving the qualitative aspects of the design manual as well as the variances. So we'll speak a little bit to the variances here. So as we've discussed before in this committee, the development officer has reviewed the application and seen fit that it meets all aspects of the land use bylaw that it's required to, with some notable exceptions. So there are 6 variances that are being requested, and all variances have to be enabled by our design manual, which is part of our land use bylaw. And the land use bylaw, the design manual, gives specific criteria at which we ask the committee to assess these variances against. So we provide our recommendation to staff, and then it's over to you to make the final decision to say as to whether or not we got it right. So the first request for variance is a variance to the upper story side yard setback. So the land use bylaw requires that above a certain street wall height, the mid-rise portion of the building needs to be set back from the interior lot lines. And in this particular case, a 0-meter setback is being proposed. So there's a number of reasons for this. And Connor may speak to this, but principally, it's that by relocating the location of the heritage building and moving it towards that corner, that does leave more room for a building, but in order to have enough building to make this project be financially feasible and pay for the rehabilitation of the heritage building, they were looking to expand outward, and it expanded outward against this one property line. Next slide, please. Now, the specific criteria against which a variance, this specific variance is assessed against, is it needs to meet section 3.6.6 of the design manual, which says that the upper story street side yard setback, it needs to be consistent with the objectives and the guidelines of the design manual. And this is a criteria you'll see in all the variance criteria, which is just generally, is it consistent with the intent of the design manual? And then it needs to be one of the following 2. So either where the building height is substantially lower than the maximum permitted height, or, and this is the one that we feel applies in this case, a reduction in setbacks results in the concealment of an existing blank wall with a new well-designed structure. So as I mentioned previously, in those context images, we saw that the Soho had a pretty significant. So we recommend that the committee approve this variance under that C and A criteria. Next slide, please. Variances 2 and 3 are street wall height variances. So the proposal seeks a variance to the maximum and the minimum street wall heights facing both Barrington and South Street. So in this particular image, we have the Barrington Street elevation. And on Barrington Street, it is required to be 11 meters in height. That is both the minimum and the maximum. So it's quite prescriptive. So in this case, the applicant is seeking a variance in 2 locations One, the primary street wall, as can be seen towards the left of this slide, it's 11.75 meters in height. And then there is a small portion, again, that one-story atrium in between the two buildings, which is 5.5 meters in height. Next slide, please. And then on this South Street elevation, again, on the sitting at the park looking north, we can see that it's the same condition, but there's one portion that's slightly actually higher in this case. It's 12.64 meters as opposed to the required 11. And then there's that small one-story atrium, which is much lower than it would otherwise be required, 6.4 meters. Next slide, please. So in this particular case, there are four criteria that can be assessed, and it needs to meet A and one of the following three. So it needs to be consistent with A as well as either B or C or D. So staff believe that the street wall height is consistent with the objectives and guidelines of the design manual, and under C, the street wall heights of abutting buildings is such that the street wall height would be inconsistent with the character of the street. So in essence, the existing character of the street is largely the existing heritage building. So the cornice lines of the street wall are proposed to match and to reflect the existing Elmwood building. So it's drawing that line, and notwithstanding that they're different heights, that's more reflective to the existing grades on the site. And then in terms of the atriums, those were a requirement and more of a function of our heritage planners and what they needed to do in their assessment. And our heritage guidelines suggest that, again, that the heritage resource be the prominent feature of the building, and those other things connecting to it be secondary to those, so that those two one-story atriums were purposefully subordinate, both in height, scale, and prominence, in order to make sure that the Elmwoods are proud. So again, staff would recommend approval of this variance, numbers 2 and 3. Next slide, please. The variances number 4 and 5 relate to street wall setbacks. So section 9.1 of the land use bylaw requires that on South Street, the minimum setback line is 4 meters, and then Barrington Street has a street wall setback of 0.424 meters. So there are, on the Barrington Street side, the setbacks are somewhat greater than would otherwise be allowed, 5 meters, as much as 9 meters. And then on the South Street side, it's 4 meters required, but with a proposed 2.7 meters. So the South Street setbacks required to be varied to allow basically the heritage resource to be relocated to the corner of the site. That's why it's so close and so tight. So that one, I think, largely speaks to itself. In terms of the Barrington Street setback, that is actually because of we as planning staff, we've created a conflict between our rules. So we have our heritage rules and we have our design manual rules, and these are not knitting nicely together. So at present, the precinct requirements requires a setback 3 meters greater than the heritage resource. So in essence, again, it's saying the heritage guidelines are saying, bring your heritage building towards the street and push other things back. Meanwhile, the land use bylaw is saying, bring your building up to the street because we want a walkable frontage. So these two are not completely consistent with each other, and something has to break. So the one that's breaking in this case is that the building on that Barrington Street frontage on the left side of your screen, the new building is being pushed further back because, again, the heritage building is going to, it's felt that the heritage building needs to be prominent. Next slide, please. So the specific criteria under this in section 3.6.1, that again, the full setback is consistent with generally the objectives and guidelines of the design manual. And then one of the following, on an existing building where an addition is to be constructed, the existing structural elements of the building are prohibitive in achieving the street wall setback. So again, where the heritage building is being relocated and picked up and moved, we do feel that this is applicable. And we also, notwithstanding that we don't need both to apply, we do feel that in this case both apply, as we do feel that also the street wall setback of the abutting buildings is such that street wall setback would be inconsistent with the character of the street. Because again, with this being a heritage character district and a heritage area, we are prioritizing the location and the prominence of the heritage building. Next slide, please. The last variance that I'll speak to is a variance for land uses at grade. So basically, this is a floor to ceiling height of land uses at grade. The land use bylaw requires 4.5 meters in height. and the proposed height of that floor to ceiling is 4.01 meters. Next slide, please. So I think the applicant may speak more to this, but section 3.6.15 of the design manual outlines the variances that the criteria that need to be assessed. So again, is this generally consistent with the objectives and guidelines of the design manual? B, in this case, it is and is the qualifier. So all A and B, and then one of a number of criteria need to apply, one of. And we feel that A is the best fit. B is that the proposed floor to height ceiling does not result in a sunken ground floor condition, which this does not. And the applicant has indicated that this is the sloping conditions of this site have made it difficult to achieve a step slab, and therefore that they are requesting this variance so that they can have a slightly less than the required 4.5 meters at 4.1. Next slide, please. A qualitative wind and impact study was also submitted and forms part of the attachments to this report. So it's looked at the public realm, the parks, the plazas, the open space, the sidewalks around it. It was found that no great concern were resulted, and it was found that the development would result in appropriate wind comfort conditions around these public realms. Next slide, please. In terms of a public benefit, there is a public benefit that is required as per the land use bylaw. There is additional density that is being requested, which is permitted by the applicant, requiring a total public benefit of $165,481. Of the proposed public benefit contributions that may be proposed, they are proposing to rehabilitate an existing heritage resource, which is the Elmwood on this existing site. And again, the rehabilitation estimates of the Elmwood are projected to be north of $500,000. So this would well fit the bill, but seeking the committee and suggesting that the committee do recommend this as an acceptable public benefit. Next slide, please. The Elmwood is a contributing heritage resource being in this heritage area, and therefore any change to the building would require council approval and a certificate of appropriateness. So the heritage officer, this has been reviewed by the Heritage Advisory Committee and it's been approved by Regional Council. So subject to this approval by the Design Review Committee, the heritage officer would be in a position to issue a certificate of appropriateness and allow this development for the heritage bylaw. Next slide, please. So the recommendation of staff, as per your report, I won't read it all out, but largely we are recommending approving the variances, the 6 variances that are required, finding the qualitative wind assessment acceptable, and recommending the development officer accept the restoration of the existing heritage building as part of the bonus contribution for the development. I think that is the end of my slides. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Carl. So I'll now go through the speaker list for members to ask any questions of clarification to Carl. We'll start with Nathan. Any questions for you?
Sure. Thank you, Mary Lee, and Carl for a great presentation. I have 2 quick questions. As far as rehabilitating the Elmwood, is that hard? Is that going to be owned? The Elmwood, is that going to be owned by the developer? Like they're going to be renovating their own property, but the benefit is the heritage restoration part of it. Is that correct?
You, Madam Chair, yes. The registration of heritage properties, the rehabilitation of heritage properties. It's not a deed exchange. We don't get the land or the resource, right. But okay. The heritage designation provides a level of protection that they will last and endure in perpetuity. But the developer would own the property.
Okay, thank you. And the last question I have on variance number 1. Where you're proposing to bring the backside of the property up right up to the property line at 0 meters. Is that going to block any sort of views of other properties or whatnot? Maybe I missed that. What is the, like what's currently there now?
Madam Chair, maybe I can share maybe I can try sharing my screen again and give you a sense of that because I just happen to have it up here.
Okay.
Sure, go ahead, Carl.
Are you seeing the street view image?
We can, yes.
I can see that, yeah.
So that's in essence the condition as it exists right now.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Carl.
Great. Thanks, Nathan. Next on the list is Rob. Any questions for you?
No questions for me. Thanks, Carl. Great presentation.
Okay. And we don't have Sandrine. So next is Stanley. Any questions for you?
No questions for me. It seems pretty straightforward and well thought out with our design requirements.
Great. Thank you. Charlotte.
No questions for me. Thank you. It was very clear.
Great. We don't have Christina. Doug.
It's both a question, I guess, and a comment on it. Carl, I want to know, essentially you had the old heritage building that was set back with a bit of buffer for green space and that. Originally it's being brought up to the street front, and it's more of I'm not sure what happens. Have you looked at the, in terms of the design manual, how that new wall, how the new, basically the street wall is addressed at the base of the building? The base of it, now you basically have a balcony that runs almost at eye level at street front. There's nothing there right now, and it's essentially a black void. It's set back, it's dark under there, and you can't really walk under it because of the sloping site in the design manual, suggests dealing with sloping sites. So I'm not sure if you had addressed that with the builder at that time, addressing it's a very important corner and a very important street, and it's very kind of not pedestrian necessarily friendly in the sense of, is there landscaping at the ground level? I'm not sure what happens at the ground level for the pedestrian when they're walking down that area where you have the piers, the stone piers, and that seems rather dark and not necessarily in line with some of the design manual that addresses sloping sites and that, maybe landscaping or something. I don't know if that was addressed.
Did you want to respond, Carl?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll preface all of this with that perhaps the applicant has some thoughts and opinions that in terms of their intent. I will say that the plan is now, I believe there's sort of like wooden lattice that's beneath the porch or the deck right now. And, lattice is not the most robust in terms of materials that you'd use at grade and in an urban setting. So they're going to be replacing that. I believe they're putting units within that lower level, and there will be windows, and then it'll be recladded with a stone masonry cladding. So there will be some visual permeability. It's not going to the extent of, stairs going down or access points or doors like that, but there will be some visual permeability, and there will be cladding to maybe reflect more of a heritage character. But again, I don't want to get into that. Perhaps I'll let the applicant speak to it when they have their time.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Doug?
No, I'd like to hear about the applicants happening there, because I still think it's a very dark space, personally.
Jonathan, any questions for you?
I think I would reiterate a bit in the line with Doug is the setback is being variance to 2.7, I think. But then when we consider the veranda that's being built onto it, that brings the building quite forward. So some question on that. I think the other question was for the other variance on the flanking site where there would not be a step back. I do know that the Soho, I think, has a step back at the top of the building. I was just wondering if there's any consideration about a step back to match more the neighboring buildings step back versus all the way up the entire site. It almost seems like we're creating our own blank wall towards the neighboring building.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I believe that the Soho is 7 stories, and then it goes in for an 8th after sort of a patio space, and then it has sort of the penthouse hat on it. I don't believe we had that discussion in terms of to set back further. Unfortunately, I wasn't into the weeds of it to the extent that Dean was. I apologize. Connor might be able to add something on that too, I'm afraid. I apologize.
Okay. And then the only question I had, I'm going off script here, but I've got one this time. Carl, was there, when in reading the summary of the wind study, it did note that there were some concerns at the commercial entrances and I believe at one of the upper terraces. Were there any modifications made to the design as a result of those comments?
Yes, I believe there was an earlier wind study that was done, which suggested some changes to. I think there were more problems with the entry points, and those were further recessed, the residential entry points. But I don't think there was an easy and obvious way to mitigate the impact at the corner. I think the finding of the wind report was that this is, when you have a large open space. And then you have a sort of a coming to the end of a more like urban tunnel in terms of Barrington. Those are the conditions that often arise, and that it wasn't unduly impacting. It was definitely increasing the wind, but it wasn't to the point where it would be dangerous or unsuitable for the intended circulation. And it's not a place necessarily where it's an open plaza or benches or things like that. It's more of a place to traverse as opposed to a place to stop.
Okay, thank you. So now that we've gone through the questions to Carl, I'll ask Connor Wallace from ZZAP Architecture and Planning to provide a presentation on behalf of the applicant.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
We can, Connor, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for your attendance today and for considering this case in front of you. I'd also like to thank Carl as well for jumping in for Dean to run through the presentation and give a very thorough explanation both of the proposal and the proposal as it relates to the design manual and applicable variances that are being sought after through this application. Also, would request that can we please have the clerk share our presentation that we can run through side by side if possible. Thank you. So I won't spend a ton of time on this presentation, mainly because, as I mentioned, Carl did do a thorough explanation of the variances that are being sought after and a bit of the connection to the urban design manual requirements in terms of whether and how these variances could be considered in accordance with the design manual requirements. What I will start with is that this is definitely an exciting project that we're excited to bring forward to the committee for consideration. I think it definitely represents a successful implementation, at least at the site plan approval level, of the Old South Suburb Conservation District policies and regulations, and as they apply to integrating heritage resources with new development and growth within our downtown. So I think we saw this as the application process itself, working with both heritage and planning staff, as a successful implementation of those policies. So what I want to focus on is kind of run through those variations and speak a bit more to some additional items associated with them that Carl may not have spoke to, that are a bit more associated with the building design and some of the specifics around that. So if you can go to next slide, please, we can continue on. So this is just some high-level statistics about the proposal regarding some of the commercial square footage, the number of units, the parking that's intended to be provided, and its location within the Heritage District, and the restoration of the Elmwood structure itself. One item with regards to parking that I just wanted to clarify as well is this property is under common ownership as the neighboring Soho property. Our client, Galaxy Developments, had recently developed the Soho property and was approved by the Design Review Committee a few years back and has since been constructed. With regards to parking, we're actually proposing to interconnect the parking structures of this new building to the existing Soho building for a couple of reasons. One of which is to minimize the additional parking entrances along either South or Barrington to provide additional access to the underground parking. So the intent is to use the underground parking access that currently exists on the eastern side of the Soho building on Hollis Street that provides ramping down to an underground parking structure, That parking structure will link to a parking structure beneath this building, providing additional parking beneath using an existing access. So just wanted to provide a bit of additional detail around that, and can certainly respond to any specific questions the committee may have in that regard. Next slide, please. Wanted to speak a bit to the Downtown Halifax Design Manual and the applicable design guidelines. And as noted, we are located within the recently approved Old South Suburb Heritage Conservation District, which has some conservation district specific goals. Next slide. So goal number 1 is to promote the Old South Suburb HD as a heritage and cultural destination within the city. And the reason we feel this project aligns with that is really restoring a significant heritage resource at a significant corner within the district, and reinstating its prominence within this district, and providing a significant restoration in conjunction with that. With regards to promoting and enhancing the heritage within the district, the 2 renderings on the right and the location of the buildings is really the larger broad stroke intent of how we want to meet that goal of the conservation district. And you really get a sense of how we can accentuate the prominence of this building, even from a setback perspective. And this translates to the regulations that are in the conservation district itself. So when traveling westbound on South Street or traveling southbound on Barrington Street, there is significant prominence of that heritage building as you're walking along, and the new addition is subordinate and set back further, and orienting that building towards the corner to really make it the focal point of the development. Next slide. Next is an encouraged investment in and conserve traditional character of the Old South Suburb. So we have kind of 3 images on this slide. The furthest left is an historical image of the Elmwood Hotel. And what the importance of this image to us is this is started to help us define some of the historical character defining elements of this building, which was supported and reviewed by heritage staff and subsequently approved by regional council. The main thing that we are proposing to integrate that is different from how you see the building today is the historic veranda that was historically part of the hotel and was removed throughout its history when additions were added. There currently is an existing kind of 1-story non-covered veranda, as you can see in the middle image there, that provides access to some entrances facing Peace and Friendship Park. The intent is to reinstate the wraparound veranda along both South and Barrington Street to reinstate that historical character defining element of the building. With regards to the veranda and the foundation beneath and some of the questions that came up from committee members to staff, the intent here is really to reinstate the historical condition and presence of the street with the building. So historically, there was a 2-story veranda that wrapped around both Barrington and South. The intent is that for the story that is below the veranda that has more of the kind of stone foundation, that will be on a new foundation. There will be residential units within the floor that's at that grade that provide access out to some terraces beneath the veranda, and eventually would have some pathways to the street connection. This is ultimately an intent of reinstating the historical significance and proportions of a historic building. We did have discussions with staff with regards to a number of items relative to that ground floor of the building, one of which being along a pedestrian-oriented commercial street. And what ultimately landed on is the conflict of those pedestrian-oriented commercial street policies. They conflicted heavily with the heritage defining elements of this specific building. Subsequently, the ground floor of this building does have residential uses today. It is a residential use building. So what we are proposing is to maintain those residential uses, integrate them into the ground floor of the new building, and reinstate the character defining element as part of the street wall design to bring it back to its historical presence that it had in the left image on our screen here. Certainly can build on any questions that committee members may have following the presentation in that regard. Next slide, please. Goal 3 is to encourage cohesive development that supports setting consistent with the traditional character of the Heritage Conservation District. And you know, one of the intents of the Heritage Conservation District, particularly this one, is to strike that that balance between preserving a heritage character that exists within our downtown area while supporting growth in a part of our city that is targeted for growth and integrating growth with heritage resources. And again, for the reason that I mentioned, we think this is a good application of the policies that were created by staff to facilitate this development framework. Next slide, please. So we'll start diving into some of the variations. I'll briefly spin through these. As I mentioned, Carl did provide a detailed explanation as to the variances that are being requested and how they're consistent with the design manual. What I will do is kind of go through each one of these individually and maybe provide some additional commentary if applicable beyond what Carl has already presented. And as mentioned, certainly available to answer any questions committee members may have. Next slide, please. So with regards to interior lot line setback, there were some questions that came up with regards to this. There's a number of reasons as to why this variation is being sought after. One of which is related to the site constraints and the separation distance that we are required to have from the heritage resource to new construction. The separation is primarily linked to the challenges in related to the National Building Code with fire separation between the heritage structure, which is a non-combustible structure, versus the new building, which is going to be could be more combustible materials. However, the heritage building itself presents constraints from a limiting distance standpoint. So the entire intent was this was to have that one-story atrium to kind of separate the new addition from the old, to help mitigate those challenges from a fire life safety standpoint. So with that, it created an L-shaped new addition that connects Barrington in an L form and comes out to South Street. In the internal layout of this building, at that area where there is no step back is a exit stair and a certain corridor that if we do indicate the step back, we start to run into dead end corridor challenges and challenges for exiting and stairwells as it translates up the stories of the building. Beyond that, we looked at the design manual itself and for the criteria that Carl mentioned, there is a significant blank wall along that common property line that would be covered and kind of integrated with this development to create a more consistent street wall, and less of that blank wall would be exposed, aside from the setbacks that would be required for the new addition. The new addition will go taller than the Soho. It will create portions of the wall above in the upper stories where we will have limited ability to put windows and articulation from an opening standpoint because of our proximity to the property line. That being said, I think our discussions with staff with regards to variety of materials and breaking up that facade instead of it being a fully consistent materiality. Ultimately, those were kind of the number of reasons that led to this design intent. And by having that significant step back in the upper stories, which would be applicable essentially above the street wall, it would have a significant limitation on the infill development here, despite relocating the building and creating as much space possible between the new development and the existing heritage resource. Next slide, please. So variation 2 is with regards to the maximum street wall height, and I think this is pretty straightforward in terms of how Carl explained. This is really creating a consistent street wall proportion along South Street by increasing the height to create that kind of rhythm and consistency that aligns with the heritage resource. Next slide. This is regards to the street wall step back. So yes, the intent is this building will be closer to the corner of South and Barrington. If the plan is to move it about 2.7 meters from that property line at its closest point. With the wraparound veranda extending beyond that, you can see the bay windows or the bay portions of the building on our site plan here, with the veranda extending slightly beyond that. Now, below the veranda would be residential units with exterior access to some terraces, and the columns would come down. But essentially, the intent of moving this building is to create that space for the new infill, while also creating the opportunity to have that prominence of the building at the corner as you're traveling westbound on South Street and southbound on Barrington Street. It really becomes a prominent feature for the site. Next slide. With regards to the minimum street wall height, this is essentially linked to that link between the heritage resource and the new addition. This is a one-story link. We are proposing kind of some skylights to bring some light in that space, so it's a bright, airy space. The intent is this to be primarily used for circulation, access to the various units within the building, lobby function, access to commercial uses, etc. So it's essentially a large lobby space. That we are requesting that this be reduced to a single story, as the intent here is to minimize the amount of new construction between the heritage resource and the larger new addition. So this is kind of that sensitive link we want to create between the heritage resource and the new addition, and allow for that setback from building code reasons and allow the heritage resource to be prominent at the corner. Next slide, please. with variation 5, this is, I guess, coming to Carl's point with a bit of conflicting requirements between the heritage guidelines and the requirements of the land use bylaw. Ultimately, the intent here is to create a pedestrian-oriented relationship between the building and the street. Despite our increased setbacks, the intent here is to have this as an active plaza space between the building and the street line, both along South Street and Barrington Street. Having those articulated street walls, active street wall uses, creating some more space between the building and the street allows that heritage resource to be prominent at the corner. So that's the intent of this request. Next slide, please. With regards to the minimum ground floor height or land uses at grade, this is essentially, as Carl explained, the challenge of this site being a corner site with a sloping condition on both streets. And the intent here is to have the primary access to this building is through this one-story atrium for all the residents. Both of those accesses, both on Barrington Street and South Street, is intended to be barrier-free access to provide access to the internal circulation for barrier-free units to meet the accessibility requirements of building code. So these entrances are strategically sited at grade with street to provide that barrier-free access. However, due to sloping conditions, we had to play with the floor-to-floor heights on these a bit, with your floor-to-floor being higher on South Street and slightly below the minimum requirement on Barrington Street due to the sloping condition. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we just wanted to highlight that we see this project as a significant benefit to the district and a significant kind of implementation and application of the district's policies and in combination with the policies of the Downtown Halifax Land Use Bylaw and Design Manual. Provided some of these overall statistics again, but certainly just wanted to open up the floor here for any questions or clarifications that committee members may have. And I'd like to thank you again for your time this evening.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Connor. We'll go into questions in just a second, Doug. So thank you. We will go through the list to ask any questions for clarification to Connor. I'm going to start with Rob, though.
Thanks, Connor, for the presentation. I think that was, you provided a really good overview. We all know that these adaptive reuse and urban infill projects are extremely difficult, especially on these very tiny sites. I think the 5 variances you guys are requesting have a general comfort level, and I understand kind of why you're requesting those ones. I mean, the hard one is the tall mid-rise step back. It would be nice if you had a large area that you could do that, but I fully understand the constraints of the site. I think, like Doug mentioned, the one thing I do have a concern with is under the veranda deck, and I know that's not a variance issue, but how that area will be treated. It's interesting to see the historic photo. There looked to be an old stone seating wall that was there. There's one around the Governor General's house downtown. And I wonder if something like that might be a better treatment with a low kind of prostrate landscaping in there rather than grass. And just it looks like a dead area that's just asking for trouble. So that's my only comment. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Sandrine, nope. Sorry, just keep checking. Stanley.
No problems or questions on any of the variances. I agree with Rob about the setback, but understanding that that's a tight area that we'd be looking for that setback. So nothing more from me.
Okay, thank you. Charlotte, any questions from you?
No questions. No, yeah. Along with Rob and Doug, I see it's a little bit too short on the, I think, Barrington Street side for it to really have any interest, in my opinion. To it would be a really dark kind of patio for the tenants to have in that spot, and it would probably pile up with, unfortunately, garbage over time, because people would just chuck it in that little hole there because nobody can see it and be a nightmare. On South Street, though, if you look at I think slide 14. Or not slide, yeah, I think it's page 14. There's a, we can see the heritage building from going up towards the front of it basically, and there's quite a bit of space for people to walk, so it's not as dark. Grass would definitely not work there. I think it, like from some of the drawings, it seems to be AstroTurf, which is also a terrible like alternative, and it would be just better to pave it. Because yeah, nothing's going to grow in that kind of light, and it's going to see quite a bit of passage, because even if they are private, people might, you know, if it's raining, go under there real quick and stuff like that. So, but yeah, probably close it off on Barrington Street and leave it open on South Street, I think would work. That's it. Sorry. Thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. No, Christina. So Doug, your turn now.
Yes, keen. Oh, keen. Connor, maybe you could just clarify for me scale. I wasn't sure with between the drawings and your rendering. All the heritage building where the column is at the most easterly side, it looks to be over, you know, over 6 feet. And then at the corner of this, the west and east corner, it seems to be only a couple of feet. So I'm just trying to understand how you're going to use it as terracing if it's only a couple of columns could have actually walk under, if that. I'm not sure. Maybe you could clarify how that's going to work under there. It's hard for me to get a head around where the sacrifice for the pedestrian walking in that area, how that's congruous to the design manual where you're trying to create a positive quality pedestrian experience along that route for everyone other than the hotel guests. Maybe just clarify what's going on there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Can provide a bit more clarification around that. I think the intent now is we haven't gotten into the full detailed design of the kind of layout and function underneath that space. We know that residential uses are going to be within that ground floor. We have had conversations with staff, particularly heritage staff, around that ground floor and the design of it as it relates to the heritage guidelines and the historic elements of this building and the character defining elements of this building. There were discussions initially around this being on a pedestrian oriented commercial street and how that ground floor works, which we were able to get around because there's a pre-existing residential use. But we were struggling with that conflict between integrating a more active street wall as it hits the ground while contradicting the heritage character defining elements of this building. The intent of this originally when this building was built was, and it had that wraparound veranda and it had that kind of veranda-like experience as it relates to that street corner that was very important for heritage staff to reinstate and maintain. In terms of the function of those spaces beneath, I agree they are going to be dark recessed spaces. The intent here is perhaps there is some exterior access for those units, so they do have ways to kind of get out from their unit and perhaps even walk across the street to Peace and Friendship Park as opposed to being underneath the veranda and with a more direct line. But considering the grading challenges, yes, there will be a bit more limited opportunity to have that as an entirely graded terrace beneath that thing because the grade is going up. The intent is here to provide light to those units on the basement level, but we also want to not contradict the architectural intent of this original heritage structure, which is really to have that veranda, have those columns come down, and to have that space, that stone foundation that is prominent at the ground level.
Thank you. You may want to consider as well landscaping. I know you're looking for privacy for that, but you haven't talked really about any landscaping, and it's so important with the.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great suggestion. I think at this stage, with regards, and you would see in our drawings package, we do have a preliminary landscape plan prepared. At this point, it's really identifying areas for opportunity for landscaping. So we definitely value this feedback from the committee as it relates to the landscaping approach for that street wall condition. I agree that is going to require some careful thought in terms of functionality and also improving that street wall experience through landscape. What is that balance? But we understand that there's opportunity to enhance that with landscaping as well. And we do reflect that as a potential or as an area that we're going to look in more detail should the committee approve this to move forward.
Any other questions, Doug?
Maybe just to the chair, how do you go about with something like this? Is there anything mandatory that's going to be added to this for the design to be approved on the condition of certain things, or you just approve it?
Because the issue that's been raised, and Carl, jump in if I'm over speaking in any way, is that because it's not related to any of the requested variances, there's nothing specific that we can mandate. I believe we can make recommendations and certainly comments and provide feedback, but our approval is generally related to the qualitative element, the overall qualitative, which is where the comments come in, and then the variances that are being requested.
Thank you.
Did I get that right, Carl? Oh, can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Carl. Marilee, that's my understanding as well too, that we're voting on the variances, but can provide commentary on other elements.
Still can't hear you, Carl. I'm sorry. Maybe put it in the chat.
How about now?
There we go.
Yeah,
There you are.
I'm
IT professional. The committee can approve, they can refuse, they can approve with conditions. So if the conditions are related to the qualitative aspects in terms of, like that first criteria in all of the design manual variation criteria, is it generally consistent? If you feel that a change would be needed in order for it to be consistent with the design manual, you can say that we would approve it with the following conditions, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. But largely, yes, it's principally to approve the variances that are being proposed, to recommend on the wind study, and to recommend on the density bonusing category.
Could I just mention something? Can I say something then with that comment, with Carl's comment? And that, I mean, the design manual talks about building base, the dealing with the building base, and that it has to contribute to the quality of the pedestrian experience. So would that not fall into it? We seem to all have the same comment about the base.
I think so. We still have a couple more people to go through that have questions. So why don't we table that for now, Doug, because we can put the motion on the floor and then we can debate it. And that's where if everyone is in consensus about some of the concerns, then we can make those recommendations if that works. Okay, so Jonathan, you're next.
I just wanted to say thank you for explaining the side setback issue with the neighboring building. I think it makes sense once put into context about staircases and corridors, which are always fun to fight with in buildings. And as for, I think under the veranda, I think we fully understand why the veranda is coming back, and we can see with the historic photo about the openness of the veranda. Like you said, there might be some terracing underneath, which could introduce an opportunity to reinstate a bit the stone wall fence combo that was around the building's site. So that would kind of line up with where the building is going to land. There could be some interesting things there, I think, as it's developed. But I think there's a general consensus that the underside should be treated a little bit with a bit more reflectance to the street. Other than that, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan.
Can I just speak to that just a bit more? And I appreciate all this feedback in relation to that ground floor. It's definitely been something that we've been, back and forth with staff on and with heritage staff on with this, because it is we are looking to reinstate this historical feature, and that's an important part of the heritage aspect of this project. It's coming to kind of Carl's earlier point when we were talking about street wall setbacks. You start to see a bit of conflict between the design manual, which is generally a lot of the design guidelines outside of the heritage ones are focused on, new development, active streets, all those things. So there is some conflict there. I think the committee has some really great suggestions in terms of how that interface between that heritage structure and the street could be improved, whether it's landscaping, whether it's some sort of element that improves that relationship. And I think we're definitely open to looking at that in more detail and understanding how we can improve that relationship. But it's definitely one of those things that's been a bit of a conflict on this one as it relates to the historical design of this building and what the design manual says for pedestrian-oriented commercial streets. So it's a finding the right balance.
Okay, thank you, Connor. Nathan, any questions for you?
No, thank you, Mary Louise, and Connor, for your presentation. I think you did a really good job with sort of explaining the reasonings for the variances, and I think from a logical standpoint, it makes a lot of sense from the approaches that you are taking. And I think the development looks like it'll be a real asset to the city. So thank you very much.
Okay. I had a comment and a question, and just echoing sort of some of the concerns about the base. Looking at the historic photos, and I understand where the design has come from and the piers. When the building was set further back, there was a secondary fence and a green space in between that veranda. So I think where our concern is more the reality of moving it to the corner and just having people walking by, that there isn't that second fence, and people will be people, especially in the downtown at night. So wanting to maintain the property, and not have it turn into an issue just from the nature of people walking by at night. So that's my comment. My second, my question is about the heritage building itself. So much of this application is focused on the heritage building being relocated to the corner, and all of the variances are essentially derived from that move. Has there been studies done of the existing building and the logistics of relocating a heritage building of that size? And is there confidence at this point that can be done safely and effectively?
Very relevant question. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, to answer that question, initially, yes, we have had, us and our client have had some preliminary meetings throughout the design process for the site plan approval linked to structural conversations around this, proposal to move this building. You're right, it is a substantially large building. It's not a small building to move. However, we have a number of site visits with the structural engineer that our client is currently engaged, and have talked through, as we have been doing the design of this building, for the level of detail that you're seeing in these drawings. Like, we're not at the stage of full-on construction drawings yet, but we have been getting structural feedback on the design ideas that we are putting forward. And a structural engineer has been on site to tour the building to understand what the structure of this building is, with the building itself now it's vacant, so they were able to do some opening up of some walls to understand what's the structure behind type thing. So there is our client has also been speaking to moving companies in terms of the approach for how to move a building of this size, and has had positive conversations to date. One of the things with the structural engineer that I think came up on our last site visit is the benefit of creating this new veranda and the structure that will be below it, and the new foundation will create an opportunity to kind of get this on a new structure at the early stages and get that stabilized before the new development occurs. And excavation and mass excavation, things like that could have impact on the heritage resource itself. So the exact details of how that movement unfolds is not quite worked out yet. But I guess one of the first things we said to our client when we started talking about moving this building is, before we even bring this idea, let's start talking to a structural engineer and start talking through these ideas to make sure they're implementable, right? So we have had those conversations, and we'll continue to do so. And at this stage, we're confident that there is a pathway to do it. The exact mechanics of it are to be determined.
Okay, because my understanding from being involved in some heritage building relocations out west is that it can look reasonable and it can all be well planned out, but up until the day of when it's actually being shifted, there is always a risk that you could lose the building. Hopefully that doesn't happen. I don't want to jinx it in any way, but that would certainly be a concern.
One thing I'll add to that in regards to, that will help with some of the movement process with this as well, is As part of the substantive alteration approval and what's noted in the site plan approval drawings, the heritage resource, the Elmwood itself, there will be some restoration to the structure of there is a rear addition being removed from the Elmwood building, and the rear of that building will have to be reinstated, and we will be installing non-combustible cladding materials on that wall to deal with the relationship of the new development, both the north facing elevation and the east facing elevation, which would face the Soho building. So with that intervention as well, it gives us some opportunity to, structurally make some improvements as well. So that's another factor that the structural engineer understands and has factored into their analysis too.
Okay, thank you. So now that everyone's had an opportunity to ask their questions, I'm going to, where are we? I'm going to ask this for the staff recommendation to be put on the floor for debate. So this will need a mover and a seconder, and the legislative assistant will post the motion in the chat to be read aloud by the mover. It is a fairly long motion, as they usually are, and it does all need to be read out for the purposes of the meeting. So my apologies, but if we could get somebody to move and read it out, and then the seconder can just second. Just give it a minute here while there we go. And just for point of order, we'll move it to debate. So we move and second it to debate, and then we can go around the table and ask and discuss any concerns specifically related to some of the points that have been brought up through the questions. And there's the rest of it.
Do you want me to move it then, and I can read this all out?
If you would like to, Rob, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll move that the Design Review Committee, 1, approve the qualitative elements of the substantive site plan approval application for a 9-floor addition, 2, and the rehabilitation of an existing building known as the Elmwood at 5185-89 South Street, Halifax, as shown in attachment A of the staff report dated August 10th, 2022. And 2, approve the 6 variances to the land use bylaw requirements regarding internal property line setbacks for the mid-rise portion of the development, the maximum and minimum height of the street walls setbacks, and the floor-to-floor height requirement for the ground level as contained in attachment B of the staff report dated August 10th, 2022. And 3, accept the findings of the qualitative wind impact assessment as contained in attachment C of the staff report dated August 10th, 2022. And 4, and finally, recommend that the development officer accept the restoration of the existing heritage building as the post-bonus height public benefit for the development.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Great. So we have moved by Rob and seconded by Charlotte. Thank you very much. So we've done all of that. So then we'll go through the list again for any comments or questions from the group, starting with Stanley.
No comments or questions here.
Okay. Charlotte?
I have a quick comment regarding Doug speaking about landscaping being potentially put in that area below the veranda, from what I understand is what you were maybe thinking. There's one big issue with that is depending on what type of landscaping. So if I was to put anything, it would only be like landscaping pavers to make an area that would be basically impermeable, which wouldn't be great, or slightly permeable, but a hard surface, so hardscaping. Because trying to put any plants in the area, there are quite a few buildings throughout HRM that have large planters that are under a recessed area like that, or under a balcony of the building, and the plants fail every single time. Companies have been like planting them and coming to water them once in a while at first, but if you don't have consistent watering on a location like that, as well as light, which is obviously an issue here, the plants will fail. So the best bet is unfortunately to just have it paved, like with nice pavers or something. But landscaping with plants should be kept for the like more plaza-like areas, I believe, and that would be really nice to see something then. That's the only comment I have, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Doug, you're up next.
Yeah, I want to first of all, I didn't compliment Connor in that it was fabulous. The fact that you guys are either recreating or going to rebuild a heritage building is great for the city, even if it has to be recreated at the end of the day. You know, the qualitative elements, it's the same thing. I'm just not sure how to articulate that, how you put that in. Like, you know, it's one of those things that I think should be addressed and maybe not left solely to the developer to come up with something. It's a very dark area, and I think it compromises the pedestrian experience for the whole, you know, anyone. And it's quite a busy pedestrian area, especially once it's all built up. And with the new park redesign, that I'm not sure how you put that into the, you know, the approval process. Leave it at that.
Connor, you had a comment?
Yeah, I wasn't sure now that the debate period is open if I'm able to speak to the committee. I just wanted to clarify if I still have the ability to address the committee at this point. If so, I just like to. Okay.
So if I call on you, I think you do. I don't think you get to speak though, but if I call on you, you're okay.
Meetings, and there's some protocol, so I just want to make sure I'm not stepping over any boundaries here. So yeah, with regards to that condition, I think I agree with Charlotte with regards to, I mean, we looked at how we treat that condition under veranda landscaping, you know, what's challenging for the reasons you mentioned. I think if looking at our site plan, there is still not a lot of space, but there is a bit of space between the veranda and the front property line on Barrington Street. The veranda is essentially right on the property line on, there's a bit of space between the veranda and the property line on South. However, on Barrington, it's pretty much right on the property line. So where I think perhaps something that we can look at through whether it's landscaping or when we start getting into more detailed design is in that space that isn't underneath the veranda, that's that interface between the property line, the sidewalk, and those columns and the veranda. Depending on how much space we have, what can we kind of do along that condition to mitigate, you know, the kind of like dark open space that maybe that's resulted from the historical, you know, proportions of this building. At the South Street side, I think it's, or the Barrington Street side, it's much more challenging because we don't have the space. It's also the grading starts to go up, so it gets a bit more hidden by the veranda anyway. But I just wanted to kind of table that as a thought that we didn't get into necessarily exactly what that space between the veranda and the property line may look like. And perhaps I'm curious what the committee may have its thoughts with regards to that to help improve that condition between the sidewalk and the veranda itself, not necessarily underneath. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Let's finish go through the list, and then if we need to do a second round, we can, just to respond to Connor's suggestions. So we had Jonathan.
Yeah, I think my comment perhaps is on the public benefit part. I'm not 100% familiar with the heritage bylaw of the area. I just find it a bit interesting that the public benefit can be used on their own building, money-wise, in terms of, I don't know if the bylaw would already require them to do that restoration as part of this project versus a public benefit that could be, I don't know, a piece of art or something on site or in the adjacent park. I don't know exactly how that works, as it's one of my earlier meetings. I just wanted to bring that up as a comment of a thought, let's say.
Carl, can I call on you maybe to respond to that?
So I've got the wording in the bylaw here, and it says that development pursuant to a section, which is basically wherever density bonus fees are required, provides one or a combination of the following public benefits. And the first one is where the development includes a registered heritage property, which is to be maintained, the preservation or enhancement of the heritage resource. So the intent is it's an exchange, and the thought exchange is that you're going to keep this building. we are going to relatively cast an amber that will be a benefit for the public realm and the people that walk by. So it is explicitly intended to be, this is your site, so that you will have the benefit, or we will have the benefit of the building, and you will have the benefit of potentially more height or more density or more use.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Jonathan? You good?
No, thank you.
Okay. Nathan?
No, Mary Lee, thank you. No questions at this time.
Okay. Oh, and thank you very much, Carl. Carl, that was helpful. Rob?
Yeah, I did want to just speak to that number 4, just because I've gone through a number of heritage DAs, the Victoria Hall one, which is fairly recent. I know that this building, restoring this, is going to be well over $1 million, and certainly well over the $160,000 of public benefit that would otherwise be payable. So I think this is a really great deal for the city, and I think I'm glad to see the developer moving in this direction. It's certainly going to cost a lot of money. And just back on the what do you do underneath the veranda thing, I think, you know, Charlotte's right. There are a number of species that will probably do well. Bearberry, sweet woodruff. There's a number of as long as you have some drip irrigation in there as well. So I think you can probably get some good greenery in there. And again, take a peek at that low seating wall that I think some way of interpreting that heritage wall might be a great, and it adds some seating to the base.
Okay. So I guess to put it back to the committee, we've all talked about the base. Oh, Charlotte?
Yeah, just to add again for underneath, I had the thought when you asked for potential ideas, Connor, lighting at night. Make sure that the area isn't left in complete darkness. And there are very, very subtle landscape lightings that can be found nowadays that are really, really good, that can make the area look nice. So if the area was set up with drip irrigation, which is the only way anything will survive under there, have like lighting as well to make it, you know, an area people, you know, feel bad putting trash or going into and destroying and whatever. And even if you don't end up having any plants, if it is just a paved area, having that lighting will keep it tidier than having it really dark and prone for, you know, mischief, as unfortunately the human nature does. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess that brings me back to my original point, to the committee. Based on the comments and the discussions that we've had today, do we feel that we need to amend the motion to reflect some of these comments, or are we comfortable with the suggestions that we've provided through the meeting to Connor and allowing it to move forward with the understanding that you'll look at these things through the design development? How does everybody feel about that?
I'm fine just passing on some advice and being fine with the variances being requested.
Same here.
As well.
Me as well.
I'm seeing nodding heads across.
Sure. Sure.
You're okay with that, Doug?
You know, I don't know what type of teeth that'll have, but it's a great development. It's just, yeah. Sure. We'll give it a shot and see.
Okay. So I'm going to call the question on the motion and for the vote to be held. So I'm not going to read it all out, but the motion that was put forward by Rob and seconded by Charlotte, that is in the chat currently. All those in favor signify by saying aye, and any contrary minded say nay.
Aye.
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 Okay, and the motion has carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Just going through our last few items, we have no other preliminary presentations, nothing with regards to committee members, and no added items. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 13th. However, Annie, are we going to be putting out a poll to update that date?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, with respect to Carl's earlier presentation, there is a forthcoming site plan approval whose end date is before the 13th. So there are a few dates in mind that I will be sending out to members for their availability before that meeting date.
So you'll be seeing that. We didn't want to send it prior to this meeting just to confuse everybody. So you'll be seeing that afterwards. So that brings us to the end of today's meeting. If I could get a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Stanley. So we will adjourn at 6:01 p.m. on September 8th. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and feedback.
So.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Take care.
Connor.
Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank you.